He laughed when he said it, so I was supposed to laugh too. We were sitting on the deck behind his house. My tea was cold. He'd forgotten I liked it hot, even though I always said so. He said it when his phone buzzed and he got up half looking at me over his shoulder. "You're too old to matter, Grandma." The words just dropped. Like dust off his sleeve, I blinked, and he was already walking back inside, still chuckling at whatever was on his screen. I don't think he meant it to be cruel. That's the funny part. I think it was just noise to him. A sentence shaped like a joke meant to disappear behind a sliding door and the clink of a beer bottle. I sat there with my hands in my lap. The cup balanced on my knee. I didn't feel anything at first. That's what surprised me. Not sadness, not anger, just stillness. I watched the steam or what little was left of it drift away, and I wondered if he'd even notice when I left. I had been helping him sort out the garden that morning, pulling weeds, tying back the tomatoes. My fingers still smelled of basil. He never asked me to do it, but I'd seen how overgrown it had gotten and thought, why not? That's what you do, isn't it? When you love someone, you kneel in their dirt without being asked. His wife hadn't come outside all day. I think she avoids me because she doesn't know what to say. Or maybe she just doesn't care to try. That's the part I stopped taking personally a while ago. They're busy, young, important, in ways I'm not. It was a small thing, that sentence. But some small things hold a key to everything else. When my grandson was 4, he used to climb into my lap with a book and call me his safe place. I remember that. Not the words he used, though. I remember those too, but the way he fit there. Like I had been made with a space just for him. That boy disappeared. He vanished one text thread, one missed call, one unpaid thank you at a time. I just hadn't noticed how far he'd gone until he stood a foot away from me and said I didn't matter. I sat on that deck for a long time after he went in. I watched the sunlight crawl across the fence. A bee landed on the rim of my cup, drank, then flew off. Everything looked the same, but something had changed. Something had clicked into place, not broken. I placed the cup down carefully. My knee cracked when I stood. My body didn't argue. It had known this would come. He didn't come back out. I didn't knock. I walked around the house, past the recycling bin where his daughter's birthday wrapping paper poked out. I'd helped wrap. That gift, chose it myself. I'd watched the girl open it and toss it aside. It's already on to the next dot. They say the body remembers things. Pain, hurt, shock. I don't know about that. But as I reached my car, I noticed my hand trembling. Just barely. I held the keys until it stopped. It wasn't until I drove off that I realized I hadn't said goodbye. Not to him. Not to her. Not even to the girl I used to be when I believed love was returned just because it was given. I went home, locked the door behind me, and sat in the dark for a while. No music, no television. It's just the ticking of the hallway clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I thought, this is it then. This is the silence that follows being erased. But something else stirred in that quiet. Not grief, not yet. Something older, resolve. Maybe they had always laughed at me for keeping folders, paper ones, color-coded. I had drawers full of things. Most people trusted to memory or email. Copies of deeds, old wills, letters, originals. I kept them all because paper doesn't vanish when you grow up being ignored. You learn to leave a trail, just in case someone ever says you weren't there. That night, I opened my files just to look. Just to remind myself that I hadn't imagined a life where I mattered. I saw the original deed to the house I helped them buy. The one where I paid. The down payment when they couldn't. The one where I co-signed because the bank wouldn't accept their income alone. I saw my name, there in print, in ink. I had almost forgotten it was still mine too. I found the first copy of the trust. The one my late husband and I made. The one that named our grandson as a future beneficiary back when he still knew how to say thank you. He had no idea I kept the old one. I closed the folder. I didn't need to open more that night. It was enough. I sat back in my chair and exhaled. For the first time in months, maybe years, I let the quiet come in without fear. Not because I had a plan, not yet, but because I had remembered something. I had not been erased. Not fully, not yet. Before I was anyone's afterthought, I was someone's. Everything. I was a mother first, then a widow, then a grandmother. And somewhere along the way, I became invisible. I married young. Not out of recklessness, but because I believed in building things from scratch. Love, a home, a name. We were modest people. My husband wore the same watch for 30 years, and I never replaced the chipped dish in the cabinet because it still held food. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I don't say that with sentimentality. I say it like a fact. Like the way the sun sets, whether you notice it or not. When he died, everything slowed. Not stopped, just unspooled. Like the fabric of my days had gotten thinner. My son was already in his own orbit by then. Busy, I told myself. Married, raising his boy, trying to be a man in the world. I didn't ask for much. A phone call. A holiday meal. A photo or two of my grandson now and then. Instead, I gave money when the roof leaked. I gave weekends when their babysitter flaked. I gave space when the calls stopped. I gave silence when the invitations stopped coming. You don't notice it all at once. The erasing starts as convenience, then expectation, then entitlement. When my grandson was born, they said they wanted him to know where he came from. They asked me to move closer. I sold the house my husband built with his own hands. Left behind the hydrangeas I'd planted, the neighbors, who still knocked on my door, the tiny front porch where I drank my morning coffee. I moved to a condo near them, one they chose, one I helped pay for. The first year was warm. They invited me over. I cooked. I read stories to the boy while he curled under my arm like a cat. I sewed curtains for their nursery and picked up groceries. When they were sick, no one asked me to. I just thought that's what family meant. Showing up quietly. Fully dot. Then the texts changed tone. Shorter, then sparse. I started showing up less because they stopped asking. They said they were overwhelmed, needed space. I made excuses for them to my friends. He's working long hours. She's doing her best. It's a different time now. I tried to keep my presence small, like an old coat hung neatly in the corner there, if needed. It's out of the way if not. One Thanksgiving, they asked me not to come. Said it was too crowded, that maybe we'd do something just us later in the week. That week passed, then another. I ended up eating scrambled eggs alone in front of the news. Still, I brought gifts for Christmas. Left them at the door when no one answered. I saw their car in the driveway. I saw the shadows move in the kitchen. I told myself they'd come around. I told myself love doesn't need proof. I kept telling myself these things until my grandson turned 15 and started calling me by my first name in front of his friends. I remember the first time it happened. I had brought cupcakes for his birthday, homemade vanilla with blackberry cream. He opened the door, saw me, and said, "Oh, hey, it's just Edna." Just Edna. His friends laughed. So did he. I smiled. Then I handed him the box and walked back to my car. I cried when I got home, but only for 5 minutes. That was my rule. 5 minutes of feeling, then you wash the dishes. But the dishes didn't feel clean that day. No matter how hard I scrubbed, I kept giving. When their garage needed repairs, I paid the contractor directly. When the girl needed braces, I sent a check. I thought generosity would win me back a seat at the table. It didn't. It just taught them I would pay to stay close a few years ago. I asked my son if he needed help with college savings for his daughter. He said they had it handled, and I found out from a neighbor they'd set up a GoFundMe. I donated anonymously. They never thanked me, and still. I gave. I don't know what hurt more, being needed only for what I could provide or being dismissed. Once I had nothing left to offer. The thing about being erased is that it doesn't come with a loud announcement. It's soft, insidious. They lower your voice in the room until even you forget to speak. I started talking to myself more. Not out loud, just little scripts in my head. Imaginary conversations where they apologized, where they remembered, or they said my name the way they used to, like it meant something. That's what I missed most. The recognition, not celebration. Not thanks. Just being seen. After a while, even that became too much to hope for, so I adjusted. I turned my affection inward, learned to bake for myself again, made soup just the way I like it with extra time, took long walks without texting anyone where I was. No one asked, no one noticed, so I've made it my own freedom. I signed up for a poetry class at the community center. The instructor was half my age but kind. She called me Miss Edna. That was enough to bring tears to my eyes the first time. Not because it was formal, but because it held respect. It's the kind I hadn't felt in years. I started writing things down. Nothing grand, just small pieces of my day. A memory here, quote there. I kept them in a notebook by the lamp, quote with a pen that still had my husband's company logo on it. It felt like holding a piece of him. I began collecting myself, piece by piece, not to give away, but to remember I was whole. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even when I reviewed the will, not even when I met with the lawyer who'd helped my husband draft the trust. I just began to understand something very clearly. Love should not come with a receipt, but respect must come with proof. And I had proof in drawers, in files, in ink that did not fade, that they had stopped seeing me. But I had never stopped being real. It started with the mail. Not even mine. There was a letter in my box one morning addressed to a name I didn't recognize, but with my unit number. I carried it in and left it on the counter. Thought maybe someone had typed the address wrong. Was going to drop it off at the leasing office, but something about the envelope felt familiar. The return address was a name I knew. A bank I had once used for the family trust. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. It was a summary of account changes. The person listed, Jason Caldwell, was not me, but the file number was one I remembered. I went to my cabinet and pulled out my folder, cross-referenced the digits. It matched. The trust fund account my husband and I had opened the year our grandson was born. That was the first real chill. I felt not anger, not betrayal, just that heavy, sick quiet that fills the air before a thunderstorm. I read the letter again. Carefully. The trust had been amended. My name was no longer primary. The name's successor was now Jason. Jason Caldwell, my grandson. He had transferred the rights over to himself. That shouldn't have been possible, not without my signature, but I'd forgotten something. Years ago, when I was still more heart than caution, I'd added my son as a temporary co-trustee, in case anything happened to me. I thought it was wise. I thought it was love. Okay, I had trusted him. Apparently, he had used that access to authorize a change, not remove me entirely, no. That would have triggered more alarms. He simply downgraded. My rights made me decorative. I still existed on the paperwork, but I held no power. Not anymore. There was no notification, no call, no explanation. Just a quiet betrayal carried out in offices I would never be invited into. I don't remember sitting down. I just remember the feeling of my body folding inward. It's like a paper crane losing its shape. I called the bank, spoke softly, asked questions like I was inquiring about the weather. I used my maiden name, asked for verification. The man on the other end didn't question me. He read off details I already knew, not realizing what each word was doing to me. He said, "It looked like the most recent adjustments were made last fall." That was around the time I'd asked if they needed help with the braces. The GoFundMe, the silence, they had already done it then. I thanked him and hung up. My hand was still on the phone when I started to cry. It wasn't the money. It was never the money. It was the decision, the deliberate nature of it. The shared knowledge between father and son that I no longer mattered enough to be told. They had decided I was obsolete, not dead, but unneeded. Discardable. I sat in my chair with the letter and my folder open beside me. I stared at the signature line, the one where my name should have been asked for. It wasn't blank. had my son's handwriting. Small, careful, and unmistakably his. I remembered teaching him how to write his name. How I used to hold his hand steady when he formed the letters. How he cried once when he thought he couldn't make a proper lowercase e. I had told him you just have to keep the loop open. It's all. It's just a little space for the air to get in. He had signed away my rights in that same hand. My chest ached. Not the way it does when you lose someone to death. I knew that pain. I had worn it long enough to recognize it. This was different. This was the pain of being rewritten silently, legally. Without your knowledge, there's no obituary for that kind of loss. No condolences, just an echo where your name used to be. I didn't call them. I didn't drive over. I didn't send an email or ask for a meeting. That's not my way. I've never liked scenes. I come from a generation that knows silence can be sharper than a scream. But I didn't stay still. I went to my files. I pulled every document, every folder, every envelope. I'd saved with dates and notations and paper clips that had long since rusted. I laid them out like bones. This was the body of my life. And I would not let it be buried without a name. I made a list. Trust lawyer, estate manager, title officer. I scheduled appointments. Quietly. One at a time. I wore the same clothes I always wore. I brought my folders in a cloth bag that looked like I was going to the library. No one looked twice. They'd all seen women like me. Alone, gray-haired, tidy, forgettable. They didn't know. I had a ledger full of decisions to reverse. The lawyer looked at me like I was asking permission to breathe. She said, "Technically, you still have standing. You never signed anything away?" I nodded. She said, "Are you sure you want to change this?" I said, "I'm sure I want it to reflect the truth." The truth was that they had counted on my silence, on my love, on my reluctance to make things messy. They didn't expect me to move, to speak, to hold a pen again. I didn't raise my voice. I just raised the facts. That week, I revoked the trust successor clause. I filed for removal of co-trusteeship. I transferred the deed of the condo back into my name solely. I had always been on it. They just forgot or hoped I had. They would find out soon, but not from me. I made no calls. I did not explain because the moment you start explaining, they think they deserve to understand. They don't single quotes understanding was what I gave them for years, for birthdays and Thanksgivings and cold cups of tea. On their deck, I had given everything. Now, I was taking back what was still mine. It was a Tuesday when I knew I would never go back. Not just to their house, but to the version of myself that waited on the porch, always hoping to be let in. It was raining lightly. I stood by the window with a mug in my hand. Not tea this time, just warm water with lemon. No one had ever remembered how I liked it anyway. That morning, I had folded the last of the bed sheets, took down the old framed photographs and wrapped them in newspaper. The silence in the apartment didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like clarity. I packed slowly, with care. Not like someone running away, but someone preserving a life before turning the page. My mother used to say, "Always leave things the way you'd like to be remembered." I thought of her as I labeled the boxes. Neat, even handwriting, notes on contents. I left nothing to question. There's a certain peace that comes with preparing your own absence. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't give notice. I owned the place. It would sit quiet until I decided otherwise. I kept the utilities on the mailbox, forwarding set up to a private service. A thin curtain of dust would gather on the windows, and eventually someone might wonder if something had happened to me. Something had. But not what they'd assume. No ambulance, no hospital. No tragic ending. Just a woman stepping outside the frame they kept her in. I rented a room 2 towns over. Month to month, small, clean, quiet. A yellow lamp in the corner. Floral bedspread that looked like something from a grandmother's attic mine. Not theirs. There was a grocery store across the street. A post office nearby. I bought a new Set of sheets and a used set of dishes. I didn't need much. I had spent decades accumulating things for other people. Now, I chose only what I needed to feel human. I brought one photo, my husband and I in the backyard with our son on his third birthday. The cake was lopsided. The dog had just knocked over the punch bowl. We were laughing. That version of my son used to love me. That version of me used to be seen. I didn't bring photos of my grandson. I used to carry them in my wallet. Little school portraits. I remember the last one I added, he was maybe 16, with hair in his eyes and that half-bored expression teenagers wear like armor. I kept that photo long after he stopped calling. I don't know why. Maybe I hoped one day he'd grow out of it. The distance, the coldness. He didn't. That was the last year he gave me a hug without prompting. I think he did it out of habit, like you'd pet a dog before leaving the house. Now I left the photo behind, not out of anger, out of release. In the motel room, I wrote things down, not the kind of things I'd write to them, just for myself. Things like, you are not furniture. You do not exist only where you are placed. You do not need to be visible to be real. I wrote those 3 lines on a notepad and taped them to the mirror. Every morning, I read them out loud. My voice sounded unfamiliar at first, then more steady, then more like someone I used to know. I went for walks without a destination. I smiled at people I passed, and some of them smiled back. One woman, around my age, sat on the same park bench each morning with a paperback and a bag of almonds. She offered me some one day. We didn't talk much, but it felt like something new, or something ancient, returned. I kept a small notebook of passwords and account details. I changed everything. Email, bank logins, even the recovery questions. I made the answers things no one else would know. Where did you go on your first solo trip? Answer: Motel 6, room 214. With a yellow lamp, I removed my grandson as emergency contact on every form I could find. I replaced him with a lawyer. I left no space for confusion. They'd made me invisible. I was simply returning the favor with documentation. There was power in that. Not the loud kind. Not revenge. But a clean final line drawn between who I had been and who I would be now. One evening, I found the envelope with the last Mother's Day card they'd given me. Years ago, it had no note inside, just a signature. My son's wife had written it. The handwriting was rushed. I could tell she hadn't thought twice about it. I remember I'd cried that day, telling myself it was just the new way of things, that everyone was busy, but I see now I was already gone to them. That card was the echo after a door has shut. I tore it in half, then in half again, dropped it into the motel trash bin. The sound was so soft. Paper breaking doesn't protest. The next morning, I stood outside in the early light and breathed in the new air. I hadn't slept that well in years, so there was no weight on my chest, no waiting for the phone to ring. I knew it wouldn't. Not yet, but it would, because when you take back your name, your deeds, your voice, they notice. Maybe not right away, but they always notice, and was no longer afraid of that moment. Let them notice. Let them feel the space where I used to be. Let them wonder how the story ends. Now that I've picked up the pen, there's a certain kind of power in a motel room. No framed memories on the walls. No creaking floorboards to remind you who you used to be. It's just a bed, a lamp, a mirror that doesn't lie. I woke up early each morning, made my bed with hospital corners. Not out of habit, out of control. It was the first thing I owned each day. That and my silence. I carried my notebook with me like a compass. Each page was a direction I had decided on. It's the bank accounts I closed, the titles I rewrote. It's the trust I restructured under my name alone. Not in anger, in clarity. One by one, I removed them. My son, his wife, my grandson, everywhere they once were. Listed will, healthcare directive, property access, I crossed them out. Gave the lawyer new instructions. Left no loopholes. Left no questions. She asked me once, softly, if I wanted to notify them. I looked her in the eye and said, no. They'll know when they need to. The voice I used surprised me. It had a steadiness I hadn't heard in years, not since before I started whispering in their presence. I called the county clerk's office and filed a quick claim deed. Removed my grandson's future inheritance of the condo, a place he never once offered to help maintain but always assumed would be his. I updated my medical power of attorney. Appointed a neutral professional. Someone who wouldn't ask if I remembered to take my pills, but who'd still pick up the phone when it mattered. I moved my emergency contact from every place that once had Jason's number. Doctor, pharmacy, library card, DMV. It felt like wiping a fogged mirror clean. The funny thing is, no one called. Not once. They hadn't noticed yet. Or they had. And they didn't want to ask why. I didn't care. I wasn't doing it for their reaction. I was doing it so I could live without waiting to be loved. I bought a safety deposit box, tucked my birth certificate inside, the first letter my husband ever wrote me. The photograph of our wedding faded at the corners. My will, my revised trust. The woman at the bank looked at me with polite curiosity, like she wanted to ask what I was locking away. I smiled. She handed me the key. I carried it in my pocket like a pebble, light but real. One day I returned to the condo to collect a few final things. I parked out front and stood there for a minute, just looking at the door. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like the shell I'd finally grown out of. Inside, the air was still. I moved through the rooms like a guest in my own past. In the hall closet, I found a box of old holiday decorations. Paper snowflakes my grandson once made, his scrawled name on the back. I held one for a while, then set it down without ceremony. I didn't need to carry paper ghosts into my new life. In the bedroom. I opened the drawer where I used to keep a letter I'd written years ago. One of those just-in-case notes meant to be read after I died. It was full of instructions, reassurances, explanations. I tore it up. There was no one left who deserved the burden of understanding. Me and death if they'd refused to see me in life. That afternoon, I left a single envelope taped inside the kitchen cabinet. It said simply, "Unit is vacant. No forwarding address. Not dead, just done." That was the last time I stood in that place. I locked the door behind me and left the key with the building manager. He didn't ask questions, just nodded. Maybe he saw it all the time. Women walking away from the places that had once tried to hold them hostage in love. At the motel, I laid the key to my safety deposit box on the nightstand, sat cross-legged on the bed, opened my notebook and wrote the date at the top. Then, today, I became my own emergency contact. I underlined it. TWICE. I no longer feared being alone. Not in the way people fear silence when they don't know who they are in it. I knew I had met myself again in that quiet. She was tired, yes, but she was not lost. I bought a prepaid cell phone, one with a new number, gave it only to the lawyer, changed the lock screen to a photo of a field I'd taken during one of my walks. Wildflowers, unruly, unbothered. I went to a nearby park every morning, brought breadcrumbs in my pocket and fed the birds. I learned their rhythms, the quiet rustle before they land, the way they watched before taking a risk, the way they still flew even when no one noticed. There was no one to report to, no one to disappoint, just the sunrise, the air, the long stretch of time I finally called mine. Some evenings I lit a candle by the window, not for ritual, just for company. I liked the flicker, the way it kept moving even when no one watched. I kept a copy of the updated trust in my suitcase, tucked under a sweater. Just knowing it was there made me feel whole. They had erased me with a pen, but I had rewritten myself with one. 2. It began with a voicemail. "Hi, Mom. Just wondering if everything's all right. Haven't heard from you in a bit." I listened to it twice, then deleted it. He had waited 2 weeks to notice. And even then, his voice carried more habit than concern. The next message came a few days later. I swung by your place. Looks like you haven't been there. This is about something. Can we talk? Something, not betrayal, not theft, not the slow siphoning of trust until there was none left. It's just something. I didn't reply. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, holding the burner phone like it might sting. But it didn't. Not anymore. They were beginning to feel the edges of the space. I kept a little journal by the bed. Each day I wrote one sentence. Nothing grand, just a record. That day I wrote, he knocked on the door of a woman who no longer lived there. A week passed, then the calls came faster. My son and his wife, and at last my grandson. Hey, Grandma, are you okay? Dad's worried. I am too. Just call, okay? The same voice that said I didn't matter. He sounded younger than he had in years, like a boy who'd lost something and wasn't sure what it was. I didn't answer. I walked to the park instead. Watched the sparrows land in the same crooked tree. Bought a coffee from the corner cafe where no one knew my name but always smiled. When I came in, one morning the lawyer called, said they'd reached out. Emails, calls, even a certified letter asking to meet. I asked if she'd responded. She said no, not unless I wanted her to. I said I don't. I don't want apologies with disclaimers. I don't want conversations that sound like explanations. I want quiet, and I want my name to mean something again. She understood the next week. My son came by the condo again. The building manager called me afterward, said the man looked confused, maybe even a little panicked, said he kept repeating, but this was supposed to be hers. I don't understand. I almost laughed. He had signed away my voice on paper and then forgotten to listen for the sound of it when it returned. He thought it would always be waiting for him. He didn't know. I'd moved it elsewhere. I began receiving mail forwarded through my lawyer's office, thin envelopes, typed letters. One from my grandson. It started with, I don't know what happened. I folded it and placed it back in the envelope. That line was enough. If you have to say you don't know what happened, you weren't paying attention when it did. They posted on Facebook too. A photo of the family at a birthday dinner. My chair conspicuously empty. The caption read, wish someone else had been there. I didn't react. I watched as people commented with concern. Hope everything is okay. Thinking of you all. They had painted me as missing, not moved. As a tragedy, not a choice. I let them. Story they told was easier to digest than the one where a woman took back the air they used to breathe her name. Without gratitude, my absence grew louder. They posted less. My grandson's voice in the voicemails became unsure. He stammered more. Kay stammered, moralizing they'd built a tower on sand. He had always assumed I'd be there, on the porch, in the car. In the kitchen with the kettle already. Whistling. He didn't know I had taken back the matches. One message stood out. I didn't mean what I said that day. I was just joking. Jokes are truths with a laugh thrown in. He didn't mean for it to land, but it had. And once something breaks inside a person, the silence that follows is where they rebuild. Or not. I rebuilt on small ways. I joined a library book club, listened more than I spoke. I liked hearing the women argue over metaphors and endings. No one asked about my family. No one assumed I was waiting for someone to pick me up. I wasn't. I made a list one day, things they will learn too late. I co-signed, but I also coned. Wills can be changed. Love doesn't equal legal access. Paper remembers what people forget. Silence can be a full sentence. I pinned it to the corkboard in my motel room. That was my will now. In spirit, if not ink. Some evenings I imagined what their dinner table looked like. The chair left open. The question no one asked out loud. Why didn't she call? Why didn't she come back? Because I didn't vanish. I left. They had built a story in which I was the stubborn one, the emotional one, the unreasonable old woman who needed to let things go. But what I let go of was their illusion. The one where they could take, and I would refill myself. Without cost, they had run up a balance and I had closed the account. No forwarding address. No debt collection. Just silence. And the sound of their own voices finally bouncing back at them without mine to catch them. I didn't rejoice, but I didn't grieve either. I simply existed. In my new, small life, in my clean sheets, in my morning walks, in the freedom of not being an afterthought. The motel desk clerk's name was Lena. I didn't ask, she told me the second week I stayed there, while handing over a folded envelope from my lawyer. I thought you looked like someone who likes her peace, she said. So I put you down for the quiet wing. I nodded and thanked her. That night, I slipped a note into the tip jar on the counter. Thank you for the silence. It's more than I had at home. After that, she started setting aside extra coffee packets for me. Left a mint on my pillow when she cleaned the room. Didn't say much more. Just little things. She reminded me of myself once. Tired around the eyes but still paying attention. She couldn't have been more than 40. Always with a pen in her hair and a paperback under the counter. I liked her presence. She didn't ask questions. She didn't fill silence with noise. She'll let it be. There was a grocery store across from the motel. I began going in the early hours before the shelves were picked over and the music got too loud. The cashier at Lane 5 was a young man named Eli. His name tag was crooked. His eyes were soft. He said good morning like he meant it. Looked up. When he scanned each item, didn't rush me, didn't pretend not to see me. One day he noticed I had a bandage on my wrist from bumping into the dresser. You okay, ma'am? I was surprised by the question. Not because he asked, because I hadn't heard concern in a voice for so long that I had forgotten what it sounded like. I nodded and said, just clumsy. He smiled. Everyone gets clumsy, ma'am. Even my mom, and she's got eyes like a hawk. That was all. He moved on. But I held that line all day. Like a ribbon tied around my wrist. That evening, I sat by the window and watched a boy skateboard in the parking lot. He wasn't supposed to be out there, but no one told him to leave. He looked free, a little reckless, completely unaware of how precious that was. I found myself smiling, not because I knew him, but because I didn't have to. The world was full of people I didn't have to love to feel alive beside, for the first time in years. I stopped imagining who was thinking of me. I started noticing who was near me. I volunteered at the church pantry. They didn't ask for a background check. Just showed me the gloves and told me how to scoop rice into paper bags. The woman beside me, Jeanette, wore old pearls to volunteer shifts and told stories about her brother's chickens. She didn't ask if I had grandkids. Liked plum jam? I said I did. She brought me a jar the next week. It tasted like something my grandmother once made. I almost cried but didn't. Instead, I told her I'd bring her my husband's old scone recipe. She said she'd like that. We didn't talk about family, just food, whether or not the tulips would bloom early. I liked that. I liked being a woman again, not a mother evaluated by how well she was clung to. The motel room became less temporary. I added little things, a new lamp, a red dish towel, a mug that said steady as she goes. Found it in a thrift shop for 50 cents. It made me laugh. I planted a basil sprig in a paper cup and kept it on the windowsill. I named it Grace. It grew slowly. But it grew. I no longer jumped at every ring of the burner phone. Most days, I turned it off entirely. The only number I needed was the lawyer's, and she emailed. When she did call, it was to confirm that all documents had been officially updated. Everything had been filed, notarized, legal, she said. It's done. I said thank you. I slept better that night than I had in 20 years. Sometimes I dreamed of them, and my son standing at the door. My grandson, looking like the boy he once was. Holding a wilted flower dot in the dream, they never spoke. They just stood there, waiting. But I didn't open the door. I simply turned and walked further into the light. One morning, while walking past the community center, I saw a notice for a watercolor class. I hadn't held a brush in decades. That I went in. There were 8 of us, all different kinds of quiet, a retired nurse, a man who said little but always painted birds, a young woman who wore headphones and never smiled, but stayed late to clean. The brushes. I painted a window, then a teacup, then a small yellow chair empty. The teacher said I had a calm hand. I almost told her why. Instead, I just smiled. I started making a life out of small routines. A walk to the diner on Sundays. Lemon water at dawn. A crossword from the free paper bin. I wrote notes to myself and tucked them into books I left at the laundromat. Keep going. You are not too late. They were wrong. I didn't sign them. I just hoped someone would find one someday and feel a little less erased. I didn't need a family to call it home. I needed a life that didn't shrink every time I walked into the room, and slowly, that's what I built. Out of mints left on pillows, out of plum jam and rice scoops and crooked name tags, out of quiet people who saw me without asking what I used to be. They gave nothing extravagant, but what they gave gently, and I never once felt like I didn't matter. The letter came on a Thursday. Thick paper, blue ink, my name written in shaky cursive across the front. It had been forwarded through my lawyer, as everything was now. She had sent a message first asking if I wanted it. I had said yes. I knew before I opened it that it would be from him, not my son, not the one who filed the trust change behind my back and signed with the same hand I once guided across a homework page. It was from my grandson, Jason. The envelope sat on my nightstand for 3 days before I touched it again. I wasn't afraid of what it said. I just didn't know if it still mattered. On the 4th day, I opened it while the sun was coming up. I sat by the window with Gracie basil plant growing steady in the sill. There were no apologies in the first paragraph. It's just confusion. Hurt? He wrote that he didn't understand what had happened, that no one was telling him anything. That he'd driven by the condo twice and everything looked the same, except for the absence of me. He said he missed me. He said it was strange, not having me around for the holidays. The kitchen was quieter. His mother didn't make my cranberry relish recipe right. His father didn't mention me, not once. He said he kept thinking about that day on the deck. The joke. Said he hadn't meant it. Said it came out wrong. He was just being dumb. That maybe he thought I knew he didn't mean it. He said, "You always knew what I meant, Grandma." But that wasn't true. I only knew what he didn't say. He didn't say, "Thank you." He didn't say, "I'm sorry" when I dropped off birthday gifts no one acknowledged. He didn't say, "I love you" when I handed over pieces of my life so he could grow his. He didn't say anything. Not really. Till I was already gone. The second half of the letter was more careful. He said he was scared. Said he'd found out about the trust, the deed, the changes. He said his dad had gone quiet, that there were arguments in the house. He said it felt like I had disappeared. He asked if I could call just once. Said, "I just want to hear your voice." I folded the letter and set it back in the envelope. I didn't cry, not because it didn't matter, but because it wasn't enough to deserve tears. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. He had not reached for me until the ground under him shifted, and I would not be the landing place for his fall. That afternoon, I took the letter and walked to the cafe, sat by the window. Ordered lemon tea and a slice of pound cake. I brought a pen, the good kind, black ink. And I wrote back, not for him, for myself. "Jason, I received your letter." Yes, I left. Not because of one thing, but because of many. 1,000 small absences. 1,000 forgotten thank yous. 1,000 days I sat alone while you all moved on without me. I was never loud in your life. I was the one who brought the napkins. Who remembered which cup you liked? Who sat in the back seat, so no one else had to? I was the one who filled the gaps you didn't know were there. Until I stopped. You said you didn't mean the joke. That you were being dumb. That you thought I'd understand, but I did understand. I understood exactly what you meant. You thought I would always be there, no matter how little you gave. You thought love meant permanence. But love is a choice, and I made mine. I choose myself now. I am not angry. I am not punishing you, but I will not come back. You will be okay. You are young. You will learn, or you won't. Either way, I am not your lesson to learn. I am my own person. I wish you gentleness, and I hope one day you speak to the next woman in your life like she is already whole. Because she is, just as I am. Grandma mailed it that evening. No return address, just my name. That was enough. The next morning, I walked to the park and sat on the bench where I usually saw Jeanette. She wasn't there, but the air was soft, and the sky held no weight. I sat for a while, holding nothing in my hands. For once, I didn't need a task. A list. A role to fill. I was allowed to simply exist. Someone walked by with a dog. The dog stopped and looked at me. I looked back. Neither of us said a word. And then it was gone. That was enough, too. Later, when I returned to the motel, there was a message at the front. Desk. The young man at the register said, "Someone called and asked if you were all right. Didn't leave a name. Just wanted to know if you were safe." I nodded. I said, "Tell them I'm not available." He tilted his head. "You sure?" I smiled. "Yes." I'm sure that night I lit a candle and sat by the window. Grace had grown to new leaves. I didn't answer the phone when it rang. Instead, I wrote in my journal, "I am not theirs to reach anymore." The motel room feels smaller now, but not in a suffocating way. More like a shell I've finally outgrown. I've lived here for almost 6 months, long enough for the staff to stop seeing me as a guest and start seeing me as part of the background. Lena leaves fresh towels without knocking. The maintenance man smiles and nods when we pass in the hallway. I don't think they know where I came from. That's the thing about disappearing quietly. People only ask when you scream on your way out. I never screamed. I whispered, and then I walked. I've started packing again. Not because I've been found, but because I'm ready. There's a small rental house near the edge of town. Little white cottage with chipped shutters and a garden that needs attention. It faces west. The landlord said the last tenant planted mint and left behind a rocking chair. I said I'd take it. The move isn't urgent. I could stay here another week. But I want to end this chapter on my own timing, not because I've been chased out, but because I'm choosing, again, what comes next. I stood in front of the mirror this morning and didn't flinch. I used to. Avoid eye contact with myself. Not out of shame, but out of grief. The kind of grief that comes when you've been made to feel like a ghost in your own skin. But now I look and I see a woman who kept herself alive. Not just breathing. Alive. Yesterday, I burned the last letter. Not Jason's, not my son's, an old one. Folded 4 times and yellowing at the edges. It was a letter I had written years ago in a moment of deep hurt, begging them to include me. To remember I existed. Please let me know the next time you gather. I'd love to see the kids. I miss being part of the family. I had never sent it. I had kept it, thinking maybe one day I'd read it again and laugh at how things had changed. But they didn't change. I did. I took the letter out behind the motel, stood by the dumpster, and lit a single match. I watched it burn all the way down to the corner. The words curled into ash, then lifted. Quiet, beautiful smoke. When it was gone, I didn't feel lighter. I felt cleaner. Today. I sat on the edge of the bed and packed the last of my things. A pair of shoes, my red dish towel, the little lamp I bought at the thrift store. Grace, the basil plant, will ride in the passenger seat. I wrapped her in a blanket and secured the pot so it wouldn't tip. I left a small envelope on the nightstand for Lena. Inside was a note. "Thank you for seeing me," and a $20 bill folded in half. I zipped my bag, stood still for a while. Then, as if moved by something softer than impulse, I walked to the dresser and opened the drawer. Took out the photograph. The one of my husband and me. His arm around my shoulder, my smile still unbroken. The way we used to be. The way we were. When family meant something simple and sacred, I stared at it for a long time. Then I put it back. I didn't need to carry him to the next place. He was already there in the scones I still made by memory, in the way I folded the corners of my bed, in the sound of my laugh when I finally remembered what joy feels like in the absence of obligation. He was in me, not the photo, and I was no. Longer in morning, I walked out without looking back. The air was soft, the parking lot warm from the sun. Grace sat upright on the passenger seat, and I adjusted the mirror until I could see myself clearly, hair pinned back, lines around my mouth, no makeup, no mask. Just me. I took the long way to the cottage, rolled down the windows, let the wind in. At a red light, I passed a bakery with a sign in the window, help wanted, part-time, no experience needed. I smiled. I don't need the job. But maybe I'll walk in tomorrow and ask anyway. Not for the money, for the chance to be part of something small and warm. Something that doesn't ask who you were, just how you take your coffee. When I arrived at the house, the porch creaked. Beneath my feet, the mint by the steps had gone wild. I liked that. Things grow when no one tells them not to. I unlocked the front door. Sunlight spilled across the floor. The rocking chair waited by the window. I sat. The house smelled like wood, and wind and forgotten stories. I closed my eyes, and then I opened them. I reached into my bag and pulled out my notebook, opened it to the last page, wrote one final sentence. I am not a ghost. I am the author. Then I placed the notebook on the mantel. Tomorrow I'll start fresh. A new one. Clean pages. No names but my own. But today I rest. Not because I'm tired, because I can. And because for the first time in years, no one is waiting for me to be less than I am. The wind picked up outside, brushing against the mint leaves. Grace swayed gently in her pot by the window, and I whispered, this time I decide who gets to call me anything else.